Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on the International Transgender Day of Visibility. I am so honored to be here. My name is Josie Toda. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I call myself an actress. You guys might know me from a few things that I've done. I'm on a show right now called Saved by the Bell. It's a fun time. But anyway, I'm so excited to be here, you guys. Tonight is an event called Fierce, Fabulous, and Fighting for Our Lives. And we have an amazing panel of trans and non-binary young people here to talk about what it's like to be young and trans in this moment of time. First, I'd like to thank our hosts, the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, which is the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and the National LGBTQ Task Force for bringing us all together tonight. We're going to start off this evening with a short conversation between me and Nico Craig, who's an HRC Youth Ambassador and DJ, which is insane. I like to call myself a little car DJ in the car, but sometimes people don't like to hear my music, but that's okay. We're both in the entertainment industry, and we wanted to share a little bit about what it's like to be trans in the culture of LA. Wait, so hi, Nico. How are you?
Hey, how are you? It's good to be here. It's good to talk to you. Hello?
Hi. Yeah.
Hey, sorry, froze a little bit.
Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you and I can hear you. Can you see and hear me?
I can see and hear you.
Awesome. I was just saying such a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Like I'm so stoked to be talking about this one crazy hell of an industry we're in. But it's a pleasure. So good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. So good to see you too. Yeah, I mean, speaking of how crazy of an industry it is, I feel like you're kind of in the subsection of music and even just hearing from like cis female artists who have had
Mhm.
the platform to sort of speak up and talk about how it's a very male dominated industry. It seems scary, but as
Mhm.
a man who happens to be trans, like how has that affected you being in the
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I feel like with me, I mean, I basically built my career off of this image of me being uh, a black female cisgender lesbian, and that was a very eye opening experience for me to be in the entertainment industry and then like have the experience of like a black woman in the industry who's a queer black woman, and having that experience really, honestly, it like just being in the industry and seeing how people address me, seeing how people like respond to me. It's really interesting now that I've been on testosterone for 2 months and I've come out and been able to transition, like as alongside me DJing and stuff like that. But I will say that I think like as a trans man, I think trans men in the music industry or really in the entertainment industry will definitely be a great bridge to like solve a lot of misogyny and a lot of just discrimination and bigotry that still exists, that both cisgender women and trans women or just women in general have to face in the entertainment industry. And I feel like as a trans man, given the fact that I've had that experience like at that point in my life prior to my coming out, I feel like my experience as a black woman in the industry has helped me figure out, okay, so like where do I stand? You know what I mean? As a black queer trans man now. So yeah, that's a little bit about my experience, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's very eye opening for sure.
I love that so much. And I love how you kind of talked about how you sort of built your career with this sort of other identity that, wasn't
Mhm,
yourself or what isn't what you identify as now. And I can
mhm,
even relate to that so much. I feel like growing up, I kind of made a market for myself being an entirely different person than
right.
I am as far as like my gender identity, my gender expression. I
Mhm,
started identifying as female, to the rest of the world only when I was 17, yet I had been open with my family about my journey and how I felt about my own gender identity since I was like 5 years
mhm,
old. So
mhm.
having the rest of the world come to know me as sort of a different person is super strange. And it's like this existential experience where, you know, your outside isn't really matching your inside, which I think is what a lot of trans people go
Mhm.
through. But we probably went through on a different scale. But I
Right.
love that you talk about that, and I love that you talk about bridging the gap between misogyny and, as a Black person, you're already subject to an amount of adversity, and that has come through, and been shown a light on this year in particular, and
Yeah.
should have been, and should have reached audiences much larger than this year, but
Mhm.
unfortunately it took us this long and we did get here. But how was it like going through that, over the
Mhm.
summer? I can only imagine, as trans people, we have to see ourselves
Right.
being targeted, especially Black trans women being the most
Yeah.
vulnerable. But yeah, I mean, as a Black person, as a trans person, as someone who wasn't out until recently, how was that, going through that experience? I know that's such a large, loaded question.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's a valid question, right? And I think that I feel like seeing the I feel like, oh no, Siri just like popped up on my computer for no reason whatsoever. So anyways, I think that I honestly feel like 2020 um was eye opening for everyone, I mean to say the least, but at the same time, I just feel like seeing the pain and seeing all of the emotions brought out of like other people outside of my community has honestly, that was kind of like the main turning point where I was like, okay, so I really need to like rethink how it is I relate to the world and how I relate as a person to people, because I feel like the best thing we can do to prevent like, violence against Black trans women and to prevent violence against trans people period is to really, honestly, is to really accept ourselves. I think is the like the most like fundamental thing we can do as a people, is to have that radical perspective of loving one another, and through that we must love ourselves. And I
Yeah,
feel like 2020 has, I mean, it's been one hell of a year for everyone, but I feel like for trans people, it I mean 2020 was like such, like, it just really put trans people on the pedestal that we needed to be put on, so that people can actually listen and hear our stories and our experiences, and so that we can challenge each other in how we see the world, so that we can really eradicate the violence and anti-transness that still exists in all sectors of life, whether that be in the entertainment industry or that be my personal life or whatever. I feel like um, seeing all of the events unfold, all of the events unfolding the way they did was just very. I mean, it was almost like dude, like, when are people going to understand that if they only just love themselves a little bit more, they probably wouldn't be in this situation now, would we? Having to deal with anti-trans bills that we see, and having to deal with
yeah,
anti-trans rhetoric plastered all over the media, and all over the news. And I mean, when you wake up and you see that Arkansas just like, passed an anti-trans bill that prevents trans kids from being able to express themselves freely in school. I mean, that's this, like, little stuff like that really makes you ponder, and it really just goes to show that we can do so much more in, I feel like, in the entertainment industry to bring that to light,
yeah.
so that we don't have to keep like being in this position over and over again.
I agree. And I think that's so important. I think joy is really the greatest form of resistance. And I think,
Hmm.
we do need to, look within and celebrate ourselves. And I also really want to talk about the over 40 anti-trans bills that, have been
Hmm.
put out. But before I do, if you feel comfortable and if you don't mind me asking, um, it takes such strength and resilience to come out or announce that you're trans at any point in time, but specifically in a time where we're in a global pandemic.
Hmm.
Over 2 million people have died worldwide, and we're at this weird time where race has been brought in a conversation that it's never been brought before, and you're
Hmm.
kind of in between all of these intersections. Can you like
Yeah.
walk me through the moments where you decided that now is the time, And how was that for you?
So I think for me, and I'd like to appreciate. I'd like to take a moment to appreciate the um, because I think intersectionality is something that trans people and other gender nonconforming people, especially in communities of color, I feel like it's very hard for us um, to even relate to like other people of color too. So I feel like I guess the moment for me when I like when it hit me was when I felt like I had no one to turn to. Was when I was like, oh, okay, like wow, like this is, you know what I mean? I feel like before I came out and before I really took pride in my identity as a trans man, um, it was very hard for me to even relate to people as a black woman because I didn't that wasn't the that wasn't the lens that was not the lens that I like wanted to be seen through. And so um, for me to have to have that deep connection like with the black community, with the black trans community, and just like other black queer people, um, I feel like the turning point for me was when I realized that, you know, there are all these other people out here who are in their own skin. But I had like, I just could not relate to people due to the multiple identities that that I was coming to terms with. And talking about intersectionality has been a very big help with connecting with other queer people, connecting with other trans people. Um, and so I think what really inspired me to come out and to transition and all that was like realizing that I was not in the place I've haven't been in the place I wanted to be, you know, and really realizing that and like understanding where I was in the present moment really allowed for me to like open up and also to advocate a lot more for other people outside of my community, you know, like for example, we've seen so much like just so much racism that the Asian community that the Asian community has been facing ever since the rise of the epidemic, like or the pandemic. Like I think that um, even just that alone has inspired me in understanding intersectionality and what that means to me and what that means to queer people has allowed for me to also step out of my community and advocate on behalf of others as well.
Yeah.
So all of that has it really is like it all comes full circle at the end of the day, really, to me. So, and I'm sure you can relate as well. I remember when you first came out, and I was like, oh shit, like, oh whoa, like what the, you know, because not many, I don't think many people, I don't think many people realize that like sometimes we're not coming out for other people. You know what I mean? We're coming out for ourselves. And I think if we hold on to that and we realize that, especially like with other trans women like yourself or in the entertainment industry, like, I mean, yeah, it all comes full circle at the end of the day.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for sure. I totally agree. And I think this is so amazing that you've now reached this point. You also just said that you've been on testosterone for a few months. How are you feeling? How are you doing? I remember for me personally, when I started taking estrogen, like that was
Mhm.
such a big step because for the
Yeah.
first time, like everything that I was going through internally, I was able to
Mhm.
like take action, take tangible action
Right.
um to cure what was like a really, really bad depression.
Mhm.
So tell me, how has that been for you?
For me, well, honestly, you know, it's really funny because when I began testosterone, I had no. First of all, there was like I wasn't really necessarily like on a timeline of. I wasn't on a consistent timeline. Like I had no clue when I began testosterone. I had no clue I was. I had no clue that I would have been like that I would have began at the time that I did 2 months prior. And I remember even like socially transitioning was like a huge step for me too because
Yeah.
there's like when you come out there's like that period of like oh like okay how is it that I feel like at that point you really have to put in, or at least for me, I had to put in. I felt like so much more effort into loving myself after I came out than I did before, actually. Because when I was closeted,
Mm,
I didn't have I wasn't comfortable with my body. So I was like, what is the, like, what is the point of like, what's the point of like, taking pride in my identity if I'm not like aligned with it? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it really took for me to like really align with my identity, and taking hormones and transitioning openly has been, it's been a really great process. But at the same time, like, there's so much pressure, and I'm sure you can relate as well, because I mean, when you're in the eye of like the entertainment industry and you're in the eye of the public, I mean, you have a lot more like street cred than I do, like in terms of
I don't think anyone's
because
going around saying that Josie has street cred.
not street cred, but I just feel like
No, I know what you mean.
there's,
Thank you.
yeah, I feel like as trans people, like our
Yeah.
experiences are so like, we tend to feel like we have to measure our experiences like by like other people's transitions.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like my experience has been like, I've been trying to avoid that at like all costs. You know what I mean? Because there's so much pressure, like with
Yeah.
being in the entertainment industry, of like what people expect from me, and what people expect from me, just simply based off of the fact that I am trans. Like from the moment I walk into a room, or from the moment I'm talking to someone, like I know that the way I'm being perceived, like there's so much pressure in that, knowing that everyone has seen me literally before I transitioned. And I'm sure with you too. I mean, everyone has seen you before you transitioned, or before you began transitioning. So I'm actually curious what that was like for you, because I mean, being on camera all the time, and I'm sure people can like actually see, like people can see the evolution. So what has that been like for you?
Well, my mom always told me growing up that when I would play characters on shows and stuff, and I like never felt comfortable in the clothes that I was wearing, never felt comfortable in like the roles that I was playing, she was always like, you're an actress, you're playing a role, this isn't you. And I think that for me, it always like allowed me to disassociate from the roles that I was playing, and made me realize like whoever I am, even though I'm not necessarily living who I am, it's not that. And right now I'm just putting on like an Oscar EGOT performance. And I'm
Right.
trying to like make everyone think that I can play something that I'm not. And they're like, and then they paid me for it. And so, and that is tough, but you're right. And that is
Yeah.
very important to, recognize as trans people, even though, we're quote unquote free living our true lives, there's so many other things that you're thinking about. And I'm sure on a much deeper level, as a Black person, of like, how is everyone perceiving you? How, are you fitting the mold of what they think their Black person in their life needs to be, or their trans person in their life needs to be? But really quickly, before we wrap up, my last question that I wanted to ask you and just pick your brain about is everything going on. We have 44 anti-trans bills circulating right now, one of which preventing trans people from being able to access healthcare. There's this crazy ass sports bill going on saying that you can't play sports. And I'm like, it's almost like, what do people not get? So I just wanted to ask you if you could ask one thing of these lawmakers, or give them a piece of advice. Well, for me, if I had to say one thing, it might not be appropriate to say on air. But if you had to share some words, what do you think you would tell those people who just don't get it, who just are so invested in putting their hate into scripture in law?
Right. I would honestly say to those senators, I mean, because I've seen so many videos, and by the way, there have been people that have been clapping back at them, which is really good to see. Because for people to like, try to act like sweeping it under the rug is like, the way to go is, I mean, that's what we have been doing, right? Like we've been doing that for so long. It's just like sweeping everything under the rug. So I would probably say, if there was one thing I could say to them, I'd honestly would say, like, what is it that you benefit? What do you benefit from? Like, what is it that you benefit? How do you benefit from like putting other trans people at risk like that? Like, how do you benefit from that? You know what I mean? Because it doesn't, it really just doesn't, like, I don't understand. And honestly, I feel like there's a level of empathy that at the same time that I have with all of these senators who are making these crazy ass bills and who are like putting, there's a level of empathy I have with them only because, and I'm speaking from my experience as someone who is a transgender man, as someone who is very masculine. I honestly, because that's most of these senators, they're like really honestly, they, even though they are very anti-trans, they're very anti like feminine, very anti like they're very misogynistic, and it's honestly like I just seeing the seeing these children who have to come to terms with their identity at such a young age, and then while at the same time having to like mask and put on a facade just so that adults can be comfortable, you know, with how a child is presenting. I honestly, I don't see what it is an adult can benefit from putting a child at risk like that. I really don't understand. And I honestly, that's what I would say is like, what do you gain from putting people in danger like that? You know what I mean? Like, what does that do for you? Because if they're not able to answer that question, which I'm hoping they're not able to answer that question, then I really don't see what the point of making the bills, you know, these bills that are targeting trans people on a daily basis. Like I see so many things circling around, and that's what I would say to them is what do you gain from it? You know what I mean? Like why? So
I agree. You know, I just
yeah.
pray that these same people who are in the South who preach
Mhm.
what they think Jesus was preaching of accepting people,
Yeah.
loving people, I hope
Yeah.
that they go back and read a little about what the man upstairs was actually trying to say, which was
Right.
to love people and to
Right.
accept them and not to force your judgment onto them.
Mhm.
So now I'm giving a sermon. But
I
I
was
do
gonna
pray
say amen.
I do pray for those people. It is
Right.
disgusting, but you know, I want to end on a good note, and I just want to say that
Mhm.
you have been through so much, some of which I can't even
You as
imagine.
well, of
Some I
course.
can't. I was about to say that too. I was about to say, and I have been through so much.
Yeah, we all have.
But I'm like, but look at us, we're here. And I just want to tell people
Mhm.
watching that, like, you know, there is a light at the end, and there will come a point in time where, you know, it might feel scary and
Mhm.
like you're never gonna get to where you want to be.
Right.
But you will one day, and we're living proof of
Yeah.
that. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it's hard. You know, there
Mhm.
are slip ups. There are times where we doubt our existence because the whole world is trying to tell us to. But
Yeah.
we persevere, and we
Yeah.
do come through. So that's all.
Absolutely. You could honestly, you couldn't have said it better. And I really, and I think this is where I feel like it's important at the end of the day because me, I am on social media and there's a lot of transphobes out there who take my content down on TikTok and stuff like that, and a lot of trans TikTok creators go through the same thing. And I feel like with even with that, like it's so easy for us as trans people to really doubt ourselves and to really hate ourselves. It's so easy, or at least for me, I've realized just
Yeah.
how easy it is for me to slip into that like really like just get swept up in all that negativity. It's so easy, and I feel like when for everyone out there who is watching, like if you are, you know, putting up with transphobia or you are putting up with some sort of bigotry or violence or hatred, just know that the other person, it is not about you. The other person who is inflicting like this transphobic rhetoric and transphobic behavior, especially what we see in the government and in our country today, all of that is stemming from a place of hatred for themselves, and that is not stemming from a hatred of other people. It is coming from a hatred of themselves, and I feel like if we understand that we will honestly, we can move so many mountains. So
I agree.
definitely,
Thank you
yeah,
so much for that, Nico. And I'm so glad that we got to speak. I'm honored to have met you. I can't wait to meet you in person when it's safe.
yeah, same, of
And
course,
and
likewise.
I cannot wait to like be at a show where you're playing your set. So I cannot
Well,
wait.
hey, listen, anytime you listen, I know you got more, you probably have more friends than I do. So if you ever, hey, I mean, I'm a DJ, so
You
if you
can
need me
come
to pull
perform for
up,
my roommates and I.
I was gonna say, if you need me to pull up, I have a set right here.
Good. The
You
little
know, yeah, for sure.
please,
But thank you for
please
doing all
come
you
over.
do. Thank you for doing all you do in the industry as well, and for representing for trans women, for young trans women too. Because I feel like, I mean, as someone who was assigned female at birth, I can also understand a lot of the pressure of being a female in the entertainment industry. It's definitely real, and it exists. And I feel like the visibility that you provide for other young trans girls out there is so impeccable. So I'm really proud of you for that. So yeah.
Thank you, Nico. I appreciate that, and I'm proud of you. And I am so excited to introduce our next segment, even though I'm going to miss you, Nico, and I wish I could talk to you all day. I cannot wait to introduce Kate Sawson, who is an LGBTQ reporter at the 19th. Take it away, Kate.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me. I am so delighted to be joining you today. It is such a gift to me to be able to be here with trans youth. I am the LGBTQ plus reporter at the 19th, and I cover LGBTQ plus issues, including all of these anti-trans bills that we've seen coming through state houses. And a lot of times when I'm talking to media, I say we should really be talking to trans young people. And that's what we're here to do today, is to talk to trans young people who are impacted by these bills, but also just living their lives. And we have amazing youth here today, and I want them to introduce themselves. So Skylar, Leandre, Lala, I'd love for you to, Skylar, will you introduce yourself and tell us who you are, and just a little bit about yourself and maybe your pronouns?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and grateful for HRC for hosting this and to have this conversation. I'm Skylar. I use he, him pronouns. I am 24 years old, and I am the first trans athlete to compete for a Division I men's team in college. And I have done a lot of advocacy work since coming out. I swam for 4 years at Harvard University and was the only trans athlete to have done that for 4 years on a men's team. And yeah, I speak a lot about advocacy work, and I do a lot of work for advocating for trans kids, especially, and now with the trans bills, and really stoked to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Amazing. Leandra, will you talk a little bit about who you are, your pronouns, and what today means to you?
Of course. Hi, I'm Viandre Mitchell, proud trans woman of color. I'm one of the HRC 2021 Youth Ambassadors, and I'm also an influencer. So I'm always talking about trans visibility online. And so this day is very important to me because of that.
And Lala.
Hey folks, I'm Lala. I use she, he, and they pronouns. I self-identify as an artivist, so I'm an artist that combines my artwork with my activism work, and I'm really excited about today to chat with you all and talk about trans day visibility, because I feel like visibility is such a central aspect of existing as a trans person, whether you're visible or not. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this with you all today.
Thank you all so much for being here. You know, I know that this day is a complicated day for a lot of us, right? Like, it's a day to celebrate, and it's also a really sort of difficult and strange time to be a young trans person. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about how you feel about Trans Day of Visibility and what your experience has been like this past year? Skylar, do you want to start? We'll just
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't want to take up anybody else's space. Okay, so I always have sort of two classes of thoughts about TDOV. The first is a massive amount of excitement that there's all these trans people I get to see online. I love the lists that also bring out people that we don't normally see, right? There's kind of like a collection of like probably 10 to 30 influencers that I always see cycling through everything. And then I see people making lists of like South Asian trans activists to follow, and East Asian activists to follow, and Black and Indigenous and I just love to see that diversity there, because I think even the trans community, of course, is subject to white supremacy and ableism, all that kind of stuff, and so we only see certain people as a result of the systems of oppression, even within a marginalized community. So that's one of it, is love seeing the diversity, love seeing the visibility. And the other part of me is a little heavier part of me, which is remembering that visibility is a huge privilege. The reason we have Trans Day of Visibility is because people are still being killed, murdered, discriminated against for being transgender. We don't have this day because visibility is easy. We have this day because visibility is hard, because breathing as a trans person is courageous in and of itself. So I think that that part is both empowering and saddening and grief-stricken in that kind of combination, if you will. And it makes me think a lot about how much this is a privilege that I'm even able to stand here, or sit here rather, and speak out about who I am. It's because I have the privilege of safety. It's because I have the privilege of medical transition. It's because I have the privilege of identifying as a binary trans person. So I'm seen as cis-passing in a lot of places, right? There is so much privilege in this experience. And while it is also a burden and a difficulty to be visible and speak, it's also this privilege. So that's sort of the complexity of thought that I wanted to start off with.
Vendra, I want to ask you a question about this day. A lot of young folks learn about Trans Day of Visibility and also Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is a day when we honor folks we've lost to violence during the year. And that's a hard thing to hold. I'm wondering, did you learn about one day versus the other first? And did you have an experience with that? And was that a difficult thing?
For me, it was Trans Day of Visibility first, and that was nice because, you know, for a long time I've been so targeted just because I am who I am, and that sucks so much, but it's the truth, and it is a lot of truth for people who are being targeted out there, especially Black trans women. And so that kind of ties into the other days where we need to be talking about this, and we need to keep on raising our voices about this. And that's why Trans Day Visibility is so important, because we're often swept under the rug. We are always, you know, there isn't a lot of space for us to talk because it feels like a burden. And I felt that feeling a lot with, you know, a lot of my peers and educators, and that's very saddening. So today is an amazing day because, you know, it's the day we could just celebrate it instead of looking at it in a negative way.
Lala, I'm curious, a day of celebration is an amazing thing, but it's also a lot of work maybe to be visible. Do you ever feel that?
Yeah, I definitely feel that very heavy. I identify as being multiply marginalized, so meaning I have several identities in which like I have to navigate systems of oppression. So I say all the time, like I feel like I'm breaking down wall after wall just for there to be another wall there. And so I definitely agree with Skylar that there's two parts to this day of celebrating being able to be visible, being seen, acknowledged, held, like as we are, accepted, affirmed, all of that good stuff. But then the reality of we don't all have access to that. And I feel like I experienced this whirlwind of like privilege and depression where I'm someone who's non-binary, identify as AFAB, like feminine, all of these different things that might make me be perceived as cisgender. But I'm not a cisgender woman. I'm non-binary. I identify across the gender spectrum. I identify with terms like gender abundant, gender full, like all of these things. Like I feel like I just have such an expansive experience in my gender. And it's difficult because I'm not seen in that abundance. I'm not perceived in that abundance as much as I express it and as much as I own it. It can be hard. And especially with family who doesn't necessarily understand all the terminology, it becomes laborious for me to have to like work to educate them. I feel like a teacher, educating them about my identity, my community. And so, yeah, it can be really difficult to be visible. Sometimes, as much of a privilege as it is, it can also be a weight, and it honestly becomes like a duty to advocate for the rest of your community, which is a very heavy weight to carry, but a weight that like I do enjoy carrying. Being why I identify as an artivist, I'm a creative person by nature, and I can't help but also like use my creativity to advocate for my community, to be open about all of these things and passionate about all of these things.
I'm curious, you know, as we're celebrating visibility, also how and we're talking about these difficult things, and you're talking about some of the challenges of being visible. Do you all have things that you do to practice self-care to make it easier in the world? And what make you feel good about navigating the world and being so public about doing that? Anyone?
Oh, sorry. Andre, you can go ahead.
Are you sure? I'd say just talking to your peers and talking to your family. It's hard because not a lot of us have accepting surroundings. But that's why you get to pick your chosen family, because it really is important to talk about what's going on, because these are things that are being thrown at us that it would be harder for a lot of other people to deal with. But since we have such a thick skin and since we're carrying such pride, we're able to get through it. But like, I could not get through some of the things I get through, just living as myself with so much discrimination without talking to my best friends. I talk a lot to my trans friends as well, because they can understand on a exact level. And that's like what I would do for self-care, especially just like cry it out. It's okay to be vulnerable. You don't need to be like this a superhero all the time. But yeah, that's what I do for me.
I love all those things. I think finding community, especially within other trans folks, is so important. And I always tell other trans folks, like, it doesn't mean that all trans folks have to be your best friends, right? That's not the point. It's more that you have people who can vibe with you on these intersectional identities. And on these parts of our identity. So that's one of the things I also do. I'll also add that boundaries are super important. And I will say, I think boundaries is like a buzzword of some kind, right? How does one define boundaries? Where do you find your boundaries? How do you figure out what they are, right? So for me, it's more about figuring out, when do I know that I am not maintaining my boundaries? So for example, if I'm not sleeping enough, I'm not maintaining my boundaries, right? If I am not spending time with my partner and with my loved ones, I'm probably not maintaining my boundaries enough. If I am not doing things I enjoy that have nothing to do with work and nothing to do with being trans, probably not maintaining my boundaries really well. So I always recommend also that people do things like that and kind of situating themselves in themselves and what they love and what they need to do for themselves. Sometimes as an added layer of like checking in with yourself, as opposed to like, these are my rigid boundaries, because most people don't know what these are. And that's okay. You don't have to know them, but you do have to know when you're not taking care of yourself and being able to check back in when that happens.
Yeah, I agree with what folks have already said a lot. And I feel like more personally for myself, I really try to find time for rest and relaxation, because I find that that's something I've convinced myself I just don't deserve. Sometimes I find myself in a position where I can rest and I have nothing to do, and I'm like, I have nothing to do. I have to find something to do, because I'm convinced like no breaks. I constantly have to be just straining myself and just like overworking myself. And it's definitely a learned behavior. I feel like, especially with marginalized people, we convince ourselves to equate a lot of our worth to our productivity and just what we can get done. And do you ever think about like, what rest have I taken for myself? Like, what have I done to relax and just cool down? And so that's really what is best for me, is resting. Video games, reading, hanging out with friends, anything chill and like low key, being with my dog. Not always low key because she's a little bit hyper, but yeah, anything to kind of like take my mind off of the things that feel like work. Because sometimes like we're humans, like we're animals too. We deserve fun and joy and like being able to rest and relax as well.
I love that.
Sorry. I'd also just wanted to add that I think the other thing that we forget, kind of going off of what Lala is saying, is that in our humanity, we are forgetting that we're not just trans. I think oftentimes what happens to me is I'm like, I have to be this trans advocate all the time because I have the privilege of being able to talk about this, and it ends up being this like workaholic nature of always doing stuff. And then also it's not just that, but then I feel bad when I don't do it. And I think a lot of us feel this pressure of, if we don't out ourselves in every single moment, if we don't always stand up for trans people, we're somehow doing a disservice to the entire trans community. And the reality is we're just living. I'm allowed to just live. And I'm not saying this from a position of like truly being able to feel all of this. I have a lot of moments where I'm like, gosh, I got to do more work. But I have to be able to remind myself that if I'm not standing up 24/7 or 25/8, right, for trans people, I'm not doing the trans community a disservice. I'm taking care of myself, which is actually doing the trans community a service because I'm a trans person. And so self-care is part of that. So I think it's just a reminder to anybody who feels like they have to wear their transness on their sleeve. I mean, I guess I'm literally doing that in this moment. But I think that when we do that all the time and we can't take it off, there's this pressure and responsibility we give ourselves. So I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to add in that like being trans doesn't mean you have to be an advocate all the time.
That is really important. I appreciate that. Thank you, Skylar. You know, one of the things, of course, that we've been talking about so much, and I can't imagine being tired of talking about it. I know that I've talked a lot about it lately, are these anti-trans bills moving through legislatures, the medical bans and the sports bans. I'm curious, are you all paying attention to them? How much do they impact your lives? What do they mean for you? And what is it like to navigate the world, given the fact that these are circulating in states all over the country?
Do either of you want to start?
Deandre, will you start?
Oh,
Yeah.
Lala, someone. Lala, go ahead.
Lala, go ahead.
okay, I'll go. I genuinely don't have much to say. I've often found myself in this position of not being able to understand people who can like turn their view away from these things that are kind of in our faces. Like for example, the election and all that stuff. Like I've never understood how can you ignore it? Like it's all I think about. And that goes back to like this addictive nature of like overworking myself. And with all of these bills, I finally achieved like the ability to just like, I need to step away. Like I can't be the advocate all the time. Like I have to take care of myself. And I feel like just with navigating this pandemic as a person that is disabled, queer, a person of color, was like experiencing housing instability for months before I finally secured an apartment that I pay for with mutual aid, like in my pandemic unemployment assistance, like all of these things have been stressing me out day and night. I can't think about these bills, like, and I am so like utterly grateful for the people in and outside of the community that can dedicate like time and energy and just their full selves to advocate for the community and for the youth in our community especially, and even the youth are the people like doing the most work. Like I'm so grateful and appreciative to those people, and I feel guilty still, even though I know that I shouldn't, that I'm not as involved, but it's just like I'm constantly feeling so utterly involved that I'm like, Lala, you need to take a step back and breathe. Like you have your own things as Lala that you're dealing with. You don't have to also put the weight of the world and the country and your community on your shoulders every second. So yeah, that's me. I've been taking a step back, maybe reposting like graphics here and there, you know, like the digital age activism kind of thing I've been doing. But other than that, I've been taking a step back.
I'd say typically like what I'm doing is talking about it on my social media a lot. I'm telling my own story because honestly, it's very odd to watch everybody talk about like the sports. We'll talk about sports. It's like, it's very odd because I am not great at sports. It is not my forte. When I was doing basketball in middle school, it's just like, I made one hoop that one season. It's like, I don't understand what they're talking about with an advantage. Some of these bills are it's just basically hatred. And I kind of have to take it lighthearted because honestly, if you don't, you're gonna work yourself up and step back from some of these conversations that are happening because they are blatantly transphobic, and it's just, that's how I deal with it. But you know, it gets hard sometimes because I'm constantly having to, you know, stand up for myself and say those things.
Totally. I think I would echo both Andre and Lala's thoughts on this in that like wanting to take a step back is definitely something I feel. And also having to find humor in pieces of it, to be quite honest, because it is so ridiculous to a degree. And then for me, the way I think I deal with it is by creating resources so that I can explain what my thoughts are so other people can see them and walk through it. So if you're watching this and you want to be advocating for trans folks and you're an ally, then you definitely should be. And I'm going to push you and say you absolutely have the responsibility to advocate for trans folks. If you're trans and watching this, you do what you want. But I have many resources about the bill specifically. If you go to pinkmantaray.com/transbills, pinkmantaray.com/transbills, there is a whole action item, and you can literally just click a button to send emails to governors. The email is pre-written. All you have to do is put your name into it and click the button. There's really simple resources about why the bills are ridiculous and common arguments with FAQs and common things that people say with responses with facts, right? And peer-reviewed articles and actual science and not mumbo jumbo that people are putting on Fox News. So that's my way of dealing with it logistically speaking. But the other half of this is remembering that we're talking about children, right? Most of these bills are targeting children. They're not talking about elite level sports, for example. The sports bills are all about children because at elite levels, there are already hormone regulations and all that kind of stuff because that's what has to be there for elite levels. But we're just talking about kids trying to play sports with their friends. We're trying to talk about some, girls trying to shoot hoops with their friends or play soccer ball with their friends. And the fact that people are attacking trans girls, most specifically, and trans kids is blatantly transphobic, discriminatory, and all about control. Right. So if you were here watching Nico speak earlier, he asked, what do these people want? Right. What do they gain from putting these bills out there? They gain power. They gain white supremacy. They gain colonizer energy. All of this stuff is about power and the policing of our bodies through mostly the policing of women's bodies, most specifically Black and brown women's bodies. And this is something we all have to understand. This is a coordinated attack on trans youth, which is a power play and actually has very little to do with trans people. It is all about power. And I think it's a massive issue in this country that stems from the patriarchy and stems from white supremacy. And so in order to dismantle this, we should be doing the groundwork. You should go definitely to pinkmantaray.com/transbills and sign those emails. But beyond that, we need to be doing anti-racist work. We need to be doing anti-misogyny work. We need to do anti-sexism work. We need to be dismantling these systems that are creating these scenarios. Apologies for the I don't know if you can hear the fireman in the background, but we're at the fireman. It's adding to the vibe of the fact that this is urgent.
So can we dig into this a little bit? Because you touched on something that I feel like we in media have really not dug into, which is this intersection, right, of misogyny and white supremacy in these bills. Can we lay that out for us? Why do you feel like there's an intersection here of white supremacy and misogyny in the way these bills are crafted and the way this argument has been set up?
Okay, so I could write a dissertation for you on this, so I'm going to try to distill a couple pieces of it. Let's talk about the white supremacy part and the sort of colonization part first. Before colonization, there were lots of trans people, queer people, and there was no issue with this many genders, with folks having different sexualities. And it was often brought in, even in, by the way, in Catholicism and in Christianity before the Crusades and before power was one of the main parts of those religious practices. There were plenty of people who were queer, and that wasn't actually illegal. And it actually wasn't even in the Bible. This whole conversation about homosexuality being in the Bible was wrong. The word that says homosexuality in the Bible is actually supposed to be boy molester. So you weren't supposed to be a pedophile, which is great. We shouldn't have pedophiles. So actually, let's go back to that original definition. But all of this is, again, power playing. That was switched out right before the 1960s, 1970s, what was happening during that time? The AIDS epidemic, a massive visibility for gay folks, right? And so there's no coincidence that was happening then. Again, that's a massive dissertation, and we don't have the time to dive into all the little pieces of that. But I guess my point is that transphobia and homophobia, queerphobia in general, is born out of colonialism and white supremacy. It is a tool of white supremacy. Okay, that shifting into misogyny. Misogyny is about putting down women, right, and policing women. This is not new. And the fact that people are now policing trans women's bodies is also not new. But we see especially the policing of Black and brown women's bodies in sports with Serena Williams, with Caster Semenya, with plenty other Black women in sport. And it's always about Black women being, quote, too masculine, right? Or too good or too muscular or whatever, which is, again, the policing of bodies of sport. And people argue that the inclusion of trans women into girls sport, right? So having trans girls compete in girls sport is going to, quote, destroy the women's category, destroy the female category. This is a very common argument. The reality is that the exclusion, or the attempt at excluding trans women, is what will destroy that category. Because in order to exclude trans girls, you have to know which ones are trans. And in order to figure that out, you got to test them, which means you either have to test everybody, right? In order to be equitable and equal, you have to test everybody, which is financially and logistically impossible, or you have to do accusation-based testing. And that means you say, okay, I'm accusing you of being trans. Now I'm going to test you in order to kick you out. What's happening here? Any person accused of being trans can be kicked out then. Any person who's accused of being trans can be tested. So this doesn't affect just trans girls. And this is a really fallible argument that most of these people are putting in there. Oh, trans girls are going to ruin here. I don't want my daughter to compete against trans girls, or, quote, biological males. Your daughter will be examined too. Your daughter can have her genitals examined at the courthouse, because it is any person accused of being trans. What happens here? A, everybody's at risk. B, through demonizing and weaponizing transness, you are going to then police girls' bodies at sport. Because at what point is a girl too good to be considered trans or accused of being trans? At what point is a girl too masculine, so then she's then accused of being trans? All of these things are going to police women's sport, and then therefore destroy the women's category in many different, very misogynistic, very power played, and also, again, white supremacist ways of what looks masculine. And actually, that's the part that destroys women's sport, not the inclusion. So it's precisely the opposite. The exclusion, the attempt to exclude trans women, is what will in my opinion, affect negatively the fabric of women's category. Thank you for the dissertation. Sorry, that's a long answer, but it's a long conversation. There's a lot there.
Would I be able to hop in really quick? I just wanted to add a couple of things. So I definitely could go on forever and ever about this as well. Definitely encourage people to look into this. Like, literally, if you Google any parts of what I'm about to say, you will find information about this. But so the invention of sex and the concept of female and male is rooted in white supremacy. Fun fact. I'm not gonna go. Sorry about the motorcycle that just drove by. But I'm not gonna go super into detail. That would be a whole like college course. But white supremacy is fundamentally something that cisgender heterosexual white men founded, and in that they wanted to gain more power. More power means less people like owning that power, so they divided people into sexes, female and male, even though intersex people exist and we're not being acknowledged. That's its own thing as well that could be talked about. But during the time where Black people were enslaved in America, and also in parts of Europe, there was this concept that Black people had no gender. Black people were their own gender. And so that kind of starts to intersect white supremacy with anti-Blackness, and transphobia and misogyny. All of those things kind of rolled into one during that time. And it just like all has snowballed and broken down into piles of stone, re-snowballed again, and into like what is now like modern day transphobia, which is still rooted in white supremacy and still rooted in anti-Blackness and misogyny. So really, if you think about it, like any sort of power dynamic system of oppression structure that harms a group and also uplifts another group by causing harm, is all rooted in white supremacy, all rooted in colonization, all wanting control over certain groups so a certain group can sustain power. That's exactly what's happening with these bills. That's exactly what happens interpersonally when someone says a off statement about trans people. Oppression exists on 4 levels: internal, within ourselves, the concepts and beliefs that we have in our own minds; interpersonal, the way we engage with other people socially; institutional, the way that our government functions, the way our workplaces, schools, public spaces function; and ideological, the ways that we as a society think about certain groups and about power in the way that we act based on the power we have and don't have, and etc. The way we navigate these systems. So it's just really important to acknowledge that, oh, how, like people say, oh, how is this thing anti-Black if it's like misogynist? And guess what? Misogynoir exists. That is a system of oppression against Black women. And there are so many intersectional forms of marginalization, and even the ones that aren't intentionally intersectional, they are, like, sorry to say, but they are, because there are Black women that exist. So there they have to exist in the intersection of identity. Therefore, they have to navigate the intersection of systems and these walls that are piled up in front of each other. So I just thought that was important to acknowledge.
Yeah, I'd even say that they're kind of just scared of our power. I mean, you see us at the forefront all the time, and it's just like they're trying to do anything they can to shut it down. But that's not how it's gonna go. As you can see, we are here, we are visible, and we're gonna put an end to this.
Well, there's quite a bit of power here to be afraid of. I want to end on a question that I think is just super critical and is my favorite question to ask. And I would love people in the chat to answer this question too, as I ask it from all of you, which is, what is your favorite thing about being a trans person? And Lala, maybe you can start us off this time, and we can just all go around.
Yeah, I can definitely go around. So I actually said this recently in another meeting I was in with some friends, and was talking about how, as a person who was assigned female at birth, raised as a girl, expected to be a cisgender woman, I constantly rejected femininity over the course of my childhood. I rejected it. I shaved my head. I got an undercut and like short hair and all this stuff. Like, I've constantly intentionally been masculine in certain ways because I wanted to reject femininity because I thought that would make me a cis woman. I'm very feminine. Makeup on, jewelry, my hair is pink, traditionally feminine things. That does not negate my transness, doesn't negate my masculinity, doesn't negate the fact that I'm not a cisgender woman, doesn't negate the fact that people will still perceive me as a cisgender woman, all of these things. But so I feel like where I am now as a trans person, I feel autonomous. I feel every single way I express myself is the way that I want to be. It's not for anyone else. I'm not trying to be a certain amount of masculine so I can be perceived as trans. I'm not trying to be a certain amount of feminine so I can be digestible to transphobes. I'm just being me. I'm just existing and trying to make sure I feel safe and am experiencing the joy that I deserve to be. So yeah, just how I'm able to, I guess, sustain my sense of self as a trans person is my favorite thing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I totally agree. Honestly, as a kid, it felt so just trapped to be put in this other identity that wasn't me. And I knew who I was on the inside, but I couldn't express that on the outside. And when I finally got to do that, it was so freeing because you just get to be yourself. You get to express yourself the way you feel. And that's exactly what I did. And I think that is such an amazing experience that not a lot of people have. And sharing that experience is also really enjoyable for me because it can help people become more accepting. I can change so many people's minds within just being myself. And honestly, it's all about that. We're not predators. We're not these things that are weird. We are just us. And that's why I think it's amazing because, that's my favorite part about it.
Heck yeah. I love all of these things. I think one of my favorite parts is community. So just being able to be here with you all is so beautiful. And especially looking back at the beginning of my transition when I thought there was like nobody like me, I think being able to find people like me and realizing that I'm definitely not alone has been a huge part of my trans joy in here. One of the things I wanted to add in is that I think that trans people often feel like learning that they're trans is sort of like the worst thing that could happen, right? You figure out you're trans and you're like, gosh darn it, like really, this is the thing that I have to deal with. At least that's how I felt. And it was very difficult for a long time, and it's still difficult in many ways. But over time, I've learned that it's also one of the most beautiful experiences I think that I have in my identity toolkit, if you will, in that not a lot of people get to walk the world being perceived as a woman and as a man and as somewhere in between. And there's an incredible richness to this experience as a trans person that most people will never understand. And we get this usually 2 or more genders experience walking through the world. And to me, there's something so beautiful about that. And it's a privilege, honestly. Is it also a burden? Of course. And I do not want to ever dismiss the grief and the discrimination and the pain that we experience as trans people as well, especially those of us who are most marginalized, disabled folks, trans folks who are Black as well, and also Black trans women specifically, right? I don't want to dismiss that pain, but there's also this beauty, this incredible, like I said, richness, depth to our stories and our trans joy, I think. And then when we actually achieve that trans joy and we are able to feel that, it's that much more beautiful. So I think about that, and I think about when we look forwards and into the future, what I'm hoping for is that trans joy, that trans beauty is something that's at the forefront of our stories. It's not this grief. It's not always the remembrance of the people we've lost, though that's important. I'm hoping for a future where trans joy is familiar, where trans joy is something that we all can experience, where it's something that we do not see as a privilege. Right now, trans joy, trans acceptance is a privilege, 100% a privilege. And I'm hoping for a future when that's not the case.
I hope for that too. And, you know, I'm reading so many people in this chat who are expressing the visibility is not necessarily an option for that they're not there yet. And I'm wondering, you know, we have just like 2 minutes left. Does anyone have just a couple of words for folks who maybe are not able to be visible yet as we leave today?
I'd say a lot of these people are, you know, youth, and that visibility and within coming out is a privilege because of the belief systems and systems that you're around within your parents and your peers. And so I want to talk to the parents to just please be open and accepting to your children, because honestly, when you listen and let your guard down, it can lead to something so beautiful, which is this whole community. And you know, the kids know what they're feeling. I knew what I was feeling when I was 7 years old, and I have no doubt they are too.
I think to add to that, you're never too late to come out. You're never too late to be yourself. So even if you're not, you know, somebody who's young and in their youth, that's also okay. You have power in just knowing that you're trans. And even if you're not even sure about that transness just yet, even if you're just in that questioning phase, you are in a place where most people are not. Most people do not ever question their gender. Most people do not ever learn about their gender. So walk into that chaos, walk into that confusion with an appreciation of this experience, because there's so much more here that you have to learn. And I think that a lot of times we see it as bad if we're not out, if we're not able to claim ourselves and know our identities. That's not the case. You are absolutely not required to know everything about yourself. I don't even know everything about myself. I know that I'm trans and that's about it. And I have so much more to discover about myself. So I just want to kind of add in what we started with saying, is that visibility is a privilege. Being able to speak your truth in any way, shape, or form is a privilege. And if you're not there yet, and you don't think you will ever get there, you are still valid, and your transness is still valid. Even if only you speak it to yourself, that again is a revolution in and of itself.
Yeah, I think something that I'm still learning is that I don't owe any part of myself to anyone else. A lot of the time coming out is this expectation of fulfilling something for someone else, like filling in this gap for them, or that we owe being open to other folks. And as much as that can really be a great thing to be open and hopefully accepted for who we are, we also deserve the time to come into ourselves. I feel like that's something that people are pressured to do a lot, is come out before they've come into themselves fully, realized like who they are fully, and been able to tend to themselves to continue to grow in the ways that they need to before they're ready to be open to other folks. Because I mean, like, thinking about myself as an artist, like if I'm drawing something and someone's like, "What are you drawing?" leaning over my shoulder, I'm like, "Don't look, it's not finished." I mean, I came out and I wasn't finished. Like when I came out and I was 13 with my undercut versus like me now with my pink hair and the makeup I got on, I'm a completely different person. I was not a fully realized Lala yet. And I feel like just take your time. Like if it feels right, then it's right. If it feels wrong, take your time. Like don't rush yourself. You will become who you are in time.
You all, thank you so much for being here tonight, sharing with us, and thank you all for joining us for this. It's such a gift to have you all and to celebrate Trans Day ability with us. And that should do it for us. All take care.
Thanks so much for having us. Take care, everyone.
See you later.
Bye.